Now touching on the black manosphere. Now, most people would argue that the main three people who most contributed, got the black manosphere started, was a black male YouTuber who goes by the Angry Man, Obsidian, Mami Obsidian Ali, and O'Shea Duke Jackson. They're generally considered the three founders of the black manosphere because they wanted to separate their concerns and issues from non-black men. Here's what I'm gonna throw out there, man. And people can agree or disagree. Now, I give certain level of respect to all three of those brothers, and they made their presence known on YouTube. But I'll tell you, the first guy I came in contact with, me personally came in contact with, was the first black guy to, in a major way, start talking about black men versus black women issues specifically, as opposed to just men versus women universally, just specifically black men versus black women. And that was a guy, he was actually my first guest on my Blog Talk radio show. I hosted a Blog Talk radio show starting with June of 2007 all the way until early to mid-June of 2016, 9 years, basically. My very first guest was this brother right here named Tim Alexander. He did a video in 2006. He did a movie. It wasn't just a video, it was a movie. He did a feature film called Diary of a Tired Black Man. To me, in my own opinion, you could almost make the argument that he technically got the black manosphere started. He's the one who technically got the black manosphere started. If not officially, I would say technically. It's Tim Alexander. He was my first guest on my Blog Talk radio show. Yeah, he did a film where he basically was venting his frustrations. It was kind of half fictional and half documentary. It was a unique format. It wasn't 100% documentary. It wasn't 100% fictional feature film. It was like kind of a blend of both. Half of the movie had fictional characters that were loosely based on his life experiences dealing with black women, and the other half was kind of in a documentary format. But what Tim Alexander, here was his main argument. He felt like, if you're black in the chat room, if you're a black man, surely you're familiar with what's generally become to be known as the Pookie and Ray Ray versus educated lame argument. The Pookie and Ray Ray versus educated lame argument. Well, the first person to really talk about that more than anybody, at least more than anybody that I was familiar with, was Tim Alexander. He talked about that before any black man that I know of on the internet. That was in his movie came out in 2006. I interviewed him in June of 2007. I interviewed him in June of 2007. The movie came out though in 2006. Yeah, before Tim Alexander, nobody was talking about that whole like Pookie and Ray Ray. Basically, Pookie and Ray Ray represents brothers from the streets, from the hood, more streetish type brothers. And then educated lames would represent black men who like maybe grew up in the suburbs. They probably grew up around just as many, if not more, white people than black people. They don't really talk per se black. They kind of have almost like a white voice. And anyway, Tim Alexander was the first guy who I remember talking about that. He said what happened was he had dated a few black women that would tell him that he said whenever he would get into an argument with one of his black girlfriends, they would say, you talk white and you're kind of like a nerd. You're not like, you don't have enough thug in you, enough street in you. And he became offended by that. He became offended by that. And he turned his frustrations dealing with black women who insulted him in that manner. He turned it into a short film that went viral. Everybody was sharing it. It was like a 15-20 minute short film. I used to specialize in short films when I was in California, but that's another topic for another day. But yeah, at first it was a short film. I think the short film came out in 2005. Then he expanded that to just a full-length feature film slash documentary in 2006. And then, I interviewed him. Matter of fact, I interviewed the guy you see next to the woman. He's one of the actors in the fictional portion. His name is Jimmy Jean Louis. I interviewed him. He was my second interview on Upfront and Straightforward, my blog talk radio show. He was my second interview on Upfront and Straightforward. Yeah, but that was his main argument. His main argument in the movie and in his subsequent, he used to have his own message board and discussion forum. Yeah, he didn't like the idea of black women overlooking your nerd type black men, your geek type black men, and basically black men who grew up in a middle class, upper middle class, suburban background and favoring brothers from the streets and from the hood over them. And yeah, again, he had like 2 or 3 ex-girlfriends that basically broke up with him and ended up hooking up with like more street type, thuggish type black men. And so his argument was, why are you going to these black men who are from the streets and who are thuggish or whatever, and all they doing is either cheating on you, beating your ass, or doing both. Cheating on you, beating on your ass, or a combination of both. And then after they, wear you out, you want to come running back to guys like me. He was basically like, fuck you, black bitches. He was like, fuck you guys. He was hardcore back in the day. See what happened with Tim? Once he got married, he's on his second marriage now. But once he got married, a few years after this movie came out, he kind of almost faded to the side, faded away. He didn't have that venom anymore once he got married. He ended up attracting this really beautiful wife of his first wife. She was real beautiful. He had twin boys by her. They ended up getting divorced. Now he's married to another woman. I'm actually Facebook friends with both him and his second wife. But see, he didn't make too much noise anymore after he got married. But before he got married, think of a brother right now who's in the black manosphere that's very vocal and almost has a lot of angry commentary about black women. Whoever you can think of, Tim Alexander would either equal them or be times 2 compared to them. Yeah, between roughly 2005 and maybe 2008, 2009. Oh man, Tim Alexander was a motherfucker, man. He was a motherfucker out here in terms of their whole black men versus black women conversation. Tim Alexander was the motherfucker up here, man. I mean, yeah, he was hardcore against black women, man. He was always calling out black women on a lot of their bullshit related to dating and relationships. Again, mainly, I would say the whole Pookie and Ray Ray versus Educated Lame argument derived from Tim Alexander. It derived from Tim Alexander. He was the first one, at least that I was familiar with, to talk about that. He was talking about it as early as 2005. The whole Pookie and Ray Ray versus Educated Lane. He didn't use those exact words, but essentially, he had that same argument as far back as 2005, all the way up until about 2008, 2009. And then again, after he got married, he kind of toned his stuff down. He kind of he started doing just kind of like mainstream movies and stuff. and he wasn't as hardcore anymore. But yeah, but in more recent years, I would say starting with roughly, I don't know, 2015, that's when guys like Angry Man and Me I'm Sitting Ali and O'Shea Duke Jackson start becoming more prominent in 2015, 2016. And then that's when I ended up becoming attached to both because of my relationships with those three guys. So there was an article that came out recently in a prominent magazine called Elle. Elle. It's a prominent woman's magazine. I would say it's actually one of the top tier magazines for women. Yeah, it's a top tier magazine for women. It's called Elle magazine, ELLE. And this black woman wrote an article where she mentioned some black men. Yeah, it's called My Brush with the Black Manosphere. My Brush, and the woman who wrote it is named Nicole Young. Nicole Young. Yeah, it's called My Brush with the Black Manosphere. Nicole Young. I read the article just yesterday. And I saw where Nicole Young had tweeted on Twitter about the article. So I posted a comment on Twitter. I don't have a print screen of it, so I won't be able to pull it up. But if you go on Twitter, you identify my account and see my exchange. It started with I wrote a comment to Nicole basically saying that I had at least one problem with that article. She, in one of the paragraphs, she says, where is it? I got it in front of me. I'm going to read it verbatim so I don't misquote her. But yeah, she said something to the fact that the one thing that's the common denominator of all men associated with the manosphere and black manosphere is their disdain for women. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that. And see, that goes back to what I was talking about, though. That goes back to what I was talking about when I was telling you about the different transitions that have gone on in the manosphere. See, if you only paid attention to the manosphere beginning with roughly 2013, 2014, up until now, then you would get that perception. You would get that perception. You would get the perception that the vast majority of men in the manosphere have a strong disdain, if not flat out hatred, for women. So it's not totally off the mark if you've just been examining the manosphere in the last 7, 8 years. That's definitely how mainstream media has picked up on the manosphere. You remember when I came out with that press release where I actually said I officially want to disassociate my Mall One brand from the manosphere? It was because I was reading all these mainstream articles that were starting to associate the entire manosphere with men who were homicidal and or suicidal incels, misogynist, bitter, resentful, hateful misogynist, and just generally men who have a strong disdain for women. And I ain't like that, man. I ain't like that. It had nothing to do with what was going on YouTube. It had to do with what was going on in mainstream media. But anyway, this woman, going back to this article, that's what this woman, I'm looking for the specific paragraph. She says that. And I commented on Twitter. It mentioned a guy who interviewed me, a young brother who interviewed me last year, Aaron Fountain, who had the channel Expose the Manosphere. She says, Nicole Young says, according to Aaron Fountain Jr., a PhD candidate at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, that's my alma mater, It's less about incels in the case of black men than the manosphere, a more racially, she's referring to the worldwide manosphere, a more racially diverse space on the internet that includes men of all ages and developed its own offshoot, the black manosphere. Within the black manosphere's fiefdom, there are many subgroups, rival influencers, competing philosophies, and myriad content creators. That should be an a myriad of content creators. But anyway, um, but each of them, here's the key part. She says, but each of them contain one common thread, a concerted, explicit disdain for black women. And I took exception to that shit. Cause I ain't never, shit, anybody who been following me for a while know, I ain't never had no strong disdain, number one, for women in general, and more specifically, black women. I ain't never had no strong disdain for women in general or black women, ever. Ever. And that's why a lot of certain other black male YouTube content creators associated with the Black Manosphere have never particularly cared for me. Because I made it clear from day one, since I've been on YouTube. I ain't never had no strong disdain. Now, that's not to say I won't call out women on their bullshit, like I do in my book, The Possibility of Sex, and my book, No Free Attention. So I'm not adverse to calling out women on their manipulative tendencies, their materialistic tendencies, their sexually duplicitous tendencies, their unfaithful and adulterous tendencies. I won't hesitate for 1 second to, I'm seeing a family of deer running outside. Ain't that so? They so family oriented. I wonder if they got bucks that are considered simps by the other bucks. You ever wonder in the animal world that in their own way of communicating, they be like, man, you a simp, man. You a simp. You always be getting flowers and vegetables for all these female deer, man. You a simp, man. You a simp. Um, but yeah, man. So I took exception to that portion of that statement in the article. Was that she basically said the common denominator of men in the manosphere, more specifically the black manosphere, was their strong disdain for black women. That ain't never been my MO. Ain't never been my MO.